Dr. Jenny Waycott. Jenny is a senior lecturer in the School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne, and she works in the interdisciplinary field of human-computer interaction. Jenny's work broadly aims to understand how new technologies can best be designed and deployed to support people's learning, work, and social activities. Jenny's current research, which is funded by an Australian Research Council fellowship, examines how emerging technologies such as social robots and virtual reality are being used to provide social and emotional enrichment in later life, especially in aged care. Her research aims to understand the opportunities and challenges that these technologies provide and to inform the future ethical design and use of emerging technologies. So today we have Jenny speaking to us about technology for enrichment and connection in aged care, and we'll have some time at the end of the presentation for discussion.
Thanks, Dawn. I just realised I was on mute then. So, thank you very much for the invitation to present as part of this seminar series. It's a really good opportunity for me to talk about the work I've been doing and to think about what are the key insights that I've gained from the research. Before I start, I want to explain that the work I'm reporting on here is part of a program of research that I started in 2018. And so it predates the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has had conflicting impacts on my research. So on the one hand, the importance and value of using technology for social connectedness in aged care has never been more apparent. To protect residents from outbreaks, a lot of aged care homes have had to be closed to visits from family, friends, and external service providers. And so technology has had to be rapidly introduced in some cases to enable residents to, for example, Skype or Zoom with family members. And we've seen stories about those sorts of things happening in aged care. But on the other hand, especially over the last month in Melbourne, the pandemic has revealed just how vulnerable aged care residents are. And we've seen some pretty awful news stories about poor quality care and poor management that has contributed to the situation escalating. So I just want to kind of acknowledge that it is a difficult time to be talking about technology use in aged care when there are so many other basic health and care needs that are not being met. That being said, the stories that I've been collecting as part of my research do provide a more positive picture of care practices in aged care, and I'm hoping that the insights from this work will contribute to improving the use of social technologies in aged care in the future. So thank you for the introduction. As Dawn said, I am a researcher in the interdisciplinary field of human-computer interaction. And so for those who are not familiar with this field, it does draw on computer science, but also social sciences to better understand the relationship between people and technology. And my research focuses very much on the human side of this interaction. For the past 8 years, so since I joined Computing and Information Systems in 2012, I've been focusing on looking at how technologies can be designed and used to support older people, and particularly to provide a sense of connection to the world. So I'm particularly interested in those social connections, the use of social technologies, but also the use of technology to provide opportunities to engage in meaningful activities. So it's not just about connecting with other people, but also about that kind of emotional enrichment that you might get from feeling connected to the world. As I said at the start, we are seeing a lot more interest in the use of technology, especially in aged care settings. I want to just explain too that I'm interested in technologies to support older people who live alone, as well as those who live in aged care. But the work I'm focusing on in this talk is on residential aged care settings. And we have really seen this year how constrained the aged care environment is, and how isolated people are in aged care, especially when services have to be closed to aged care homes. And as I said earlier, we are seeing some examples of aged care homes innovating in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, so bringing in new initiatives to help residents stay connected. So this example is the virtual hugs tool that Benetas introduced back in March. It's a very simple messaging tool. And so we are seeing these innovations happening in response to the current need, but this sort of work does predate COVID-19, as I said, and the work I've been doing is motivated by this concern about loneliness and isolation that people might experience in old age. So we've seen that being highlighted, but that's an issue that has been around for a long time. Not everybody who reaches a certain age is going to experience loneliness and isolation, but it can be a real problem for people as they get older. They might outlive friends and family. They might experience frailty or mobility constraints that make it difficult to engage in activities that they used to enjoy. And in an aged care home, there can be other issues around feeling disconnected from the world. And so this is an area where we have an opportunity to design and deploy technologies to provide that sense of connection, to provide a sense of companionship. But the issue is that we need to make sure that these technologies are designed and deployed well. We need to make sure that they don't create burden for the people who are using them, that they do provide the social benefits that have been promised. Aged care in particular is quite a sensitive setting, and people can feel quite vulnerable, and it can be very difficult for people to embrace new technologies, and it can be difficult for care staff to help residents use technology. And so there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that when we are introducing new technologies in these settings, that it's done well. And so that these issues are motivating the work that I'm doing at the moment, which, as Dawn said, is funded by an ARC Future Fellowship. I'm not sure if you can hear this video. The sound is not important. I just have included this. You can hear it?
Yeah.
I've just included this short clip to kind of illustrate what I mean by emerging technologies for enrichment in later life. I'm using the term enrichment to show that it's about kind of activities that people enjoy doing. It's about providing diversion, enjoyment, connection. So I'm looking at technologies that are being used for these kinds of activities rather than more of the healthcare technologies that are used in aged care. And so one of those is virtual reality, and I'll talk a bit more about my work looking at the use of virtual reality in aged care. And yeah, there's a range of other emerging technologies, but I'm also interested in more established technologies as well, and looking at how they're being used. And you can see this particular resident is having quite a lot of fun. She's playing a game, an interactive game, and you know, she did have a lot of fun doing this activity, which was part of a research project that some colleagues and I did the year before last, actually, I think. So an overview of the project. So this is kind of a program of research that I've been running, and it involves a number of different projects, and a number of different people are involved in this work. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there's, you know, some research fellows and PhD students who are doing some of this work. And in today's talk, I'm going to focus on talking about the interviews that I have conducted with aged care providers and technology developers about their use of aged care, the use of technology in aged care. And I'm also going to talk about a case study of virtual reality that's been deployed in aged care homes. So just focusing on two of those projects. So, interviews. Last year I conducted, working with a research assistant, I conducted 12 interviews with aged care staff or volunteers and staff from IT companies. And I wanted to include the technology companies in this project because I wanted to know more about the motivations for introducing technology for social and emotional enrichment purposes in aged care. And it's not just the aged care providers who are doing this, but also there's a lot of technology vendors who are going in and bringing technology to the aged care industry. So I wanted to include both aged care staff who have responsibility for introducing the technology, as well as the technology developers and vendors who are bringing the technology into the aged care homes. And so these interviews were really looking at what are the main opportunities for these technology mediated activities and what are the key challenges that people are experiencing. And if I can sum up the main message that's come out of these interviews, I would say it's not about the technology, it's about people. So this is a paraphrase of one of the interview quotes. And really what this gets at is that it's not about identifying some new technology that's going to do something fun and interesting like virtual reality or like social robots. It's about understanding the people who are living in aged care, identifying their needs and responding to those needs with sometimes very simple technology-based solutions, sometimes more adventurous technologies, sometimes no technology at all. But the key message is that it's about understanding what people need, recognising those needs and responding to those needs. And that's what the care staff that I've been talking to have been doing. So to illustrate that, this is the quote that message comes from. So, and this is from one of the interviewees, one of the caregivers, who said, the older person doesn't care what you're using, what technology you're using. They just want to see their loved one. They need you to be the mediator. So it's not about the app or the technology. It's about people being trained in connecting, not just literally connecting through the ether, but bringing two people emotionally together and keeping that conversation going. And so what this interviewee is talking about here is the work that the caregiver does to make sure that technology mediated connection works and works well. And it's not just about saying, here's an iPad, this is, we're going to set you up so you can talk to your loved one. It's about really managing that and creating that experience to ensure that it works well. So the same interviewee provided a really lovely example that I'm going to share with you now. And I should point out that this photo, I've taken some photos from the Australian Aging Agenda magazine because I don't have enough images to illustrate my research. But the Australian Aging Agenda magazine is a really great resource for learning about the current innovations that are happening in Australian aged care. So I recommend that if you're interested. So this particular interviewee, the example that she shared with me, she talked about a resident who was bedridden and was very, very upset. And so she'd been asked to go and speak to the resident and find out what was wrong. So I'm going to read out the quote. So I walked into the room. She was crying and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "My grandson is getting married and I'm not able to go to the wedding." So this resident had always been heavily involved in family events, and it was really surprising and upsetting to her to realise that she wasn't going to be able to go to her grandson's wedding. So Claire, the interviewee, said to her, "Look, what we can do is maybe we can bring the wedding to you. We can Skype, we can do something. Just trust me, we'll see what we can do." So to cut a long story short, over the following 3 months, we prepared this whole gathering where we would Skype the wedding, bring it in, and she agreed that all of the residents would be invited to the wedding. So it became this thing where we had so many conversations about her wedding, when she got married, when she had her daughter, and then her daughter's son who was getting married. So there was a lot of storytelling about what was important to her. And then there was a lot of practical preparation, like what she would wear on the wedding day. She was going to get out of bed and get her hair done. And it was really important for the daughter as well, because the daughter wasn't able to be with her mum. She had to be at the wedding, and it really was important that she was able to be connected to her mum on that day. So going back to Claire, she said, we set up the whole place as a high tea and we Skyped in, and the overall experience was very positive. And when we turned it off, we then reminisced. Everybody started talking about wedding experiences, their own weddings, other people's weddings, and while we had this lovely high tea. So that's how it started originally. And then it just became this really significant event in the home. And so I really love that example because it's such a simple technology solution with a very human need that the care staff member has identified. And it's become not just a connection for the resident with her family and with this important family event, but also became a point of connection for the residents with each other. It became a shared experience. I also found examples in these interviews of technology being used not just for social connection, but also for fun. And I particularly like the following example that I'm going to share. So one of the interviewees, this was an IT provider who worked at a company that would go into the aged care homes to help aged care staff use technology. And he said, I don't know if you really count it as technology, but we've been using Snapchat with residents as an activity. They really enjoy that. And then the interviewer, who was a research assistant in her early 20s, she said, really? And I think you can imagine the kind of surprise in her voice. And he said, yeah, they really enjoy playing with the Snapchat filters and seeing what they can do. They're just taking photos with the iPad and sharing it around the facility. So they're not sharing it with other people, just with each other, but they're really having fun with those Snapchat filters. And I just love that very simple example because it's just injecting a little bit of joy into people's lives. Another simple example is the use of YouTube for personalised reminiscence. Again, this quote comes from the same interviewee who talked about Snapchat. He said, there was a gentleman in one of the homes that my business partner had gone to, and he was talking to him, and it came to light that this resident had been part of the Isle of Man motorbike race in the 50s or 60s. So we quickly went to YouTube, found the race, and the guy was able to relive that race. And that's not complex, but it takes conversation and trying to understand what's possible. Some people are interested in games, some people are interested in learning, some people are just interested in photos of the people they love, or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever the thing is. But what their role is to help the team, the care providers, to lift their wellbeing programs beyond bingo and card games and hangman, and to introduce some other sorts of activities in. And that's what we try and do, personalised care and connection. And I really like that idea of personalised care and connection because, again, this sums up a lot of what people were talking about when they described how they were using and introducing technology in aged care homes. Another quote that shows this idea of really getting to know the person before and getting to know their needs before introducing the technology. And this quote comes from a volunteer who goes into aged care homes and helps residents to reminisce through the use of Google Earth on virtual reality, so immersive experience of Google Earth. And he described how he would firstly go about building empathy and trust and getting to know the person through a series of conversations. And it's only when he reaches that level of knowledge about someone that he introduces the technology. He takes them back to the place of their childhood using Google Earth. And he would use VR to the point where they feel like they're walking down the street of their hometown. And so because virtual reality is quite immersive, it really can give the sense that the person is visiting that place. So this quote is an extract of a long and detailed description of the process. The interviewee went on to say, then the goggles come off, so the goggles being the virtual reality headset. The goggles are like the tip of the iceberg. VR has an ability to open up the mind in a way that like nothing else I've seen. When that comes off, I then go back and have them share their memories of that place. And so the experience, the virtual reality experience, kind of initiates then conversations about their home, their growing up. And he says they may go from a very dormant, non-communicative state to actually having a full conversation for the first time in a long time, because it opens up the mind in a way that is amazing to watch. So it's really interesting to hear that very positive view of the use of virtual reality in aged care, which could help to explain why there is so much interest at the moment in this particular technology. And this is a nice segue into the next part of the research that I wanted to talk about, which was an in-depth case study of virtual reality in aged care that we started last year, and we've had to have it on hold this year because the work we were going to do can't be done at the moment. And this case study builds on earlier work. So some previous work that my colleague Stephen Baker led involved doing a trial of virtual reality in an aged care home where the research team went in for a couple of weeks and introduced a range of VR experiences, and it was basically a pilot study to see how well this worked. And the video that I showed earlier came from that research. But what happened there is we were going in there as a research team and creating the experience, but I was particularly interested also in understanding what goes on when the aged care homes themselves are introducing virtual reality, or when technology vendors are going in and introducing virtual reality into aged care. This is a screenshot of a website for a virtual reality provider, and I took this screenshot a couple of years ago, so it just goes to show that, you know, this is something that's been of interest for the last few years. I just found it really interesting that the services they provide, that you've got aged care sandwiched in there between VR gaming and Event 360 photography. So clearly technology companies are seeing aged care as a place where things like virtual reality could be embraced. And the work that I've been doing has been looking at the deployment of virtual reality in Opal aged care homes across Australia. So Opal is a large residential care provider, and they introduced virtual reality to all of their care homes last year. And the reason they did that, so I've just got a quote there from their website. The VR program is part of our mission to redefine the aged care experience. VR has the potential to bring real moments of joy into the lives of those we care for. That's what we hope to achieve with all the lifestyle activities we offer. So it's been introduced as part of the lifestyle program in this home. So the work that I've been doing involved interviews with the lifestyle coordinators who've been responsible for introducing the virtual reality experience. We've also conducted a staff survey, which is led by a PhD student who is working on this project. We had intended this year to follow up those interviews with observations, going into the homes and seeing how residents engage with VR, and doing a bit more of an evaluation of the resident experience, where we've collected data about the staff experience, and the next step was to go in and understand the resident experience. But unfortunately, that has had to be put on hold for obvious reasons. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to be drawing on interviews to just provide some examples of some of the opportunities and challenges that this technology provides. And I think the key reason that virtual reality is of interest in aged care is because it does provide a diversion, and residential aged care can be a very constrained environment. And virtual reality is immersive, so it provides this sense of really going to another place. So one of our lifestyle coordinators said VR takes them out of their reality for a little while, which is probably a positive thing for a lot of them because their reality is not very nice. And that's part of our job, to make them feel happy in the moment with what we're doing and distracting them with something that interests them and something they enjoy. And so we did come across quite a lot of positive examples of instances where people experienced travel, were able to reminisce, and just experience, the VR kind of opened up their world in a way. And so here's one where the virtual travel helped to bring memories up that had not been shared previously. So this particular lifestyle coordinator was talking about a resident who was quite bored in aged care. He had travelled a lot, and he didn't really have enough to do. There wasn't really enough of interest to him in the group activities on offer in the care home. So the staff member asked if he would be interested in VR, spoke to the registered nurse to make sure that clinically he was okay. It was really important to make sure people were safe in using virtual reality. And she introduced it to him and it worked. He did an African one, so he got to do a virtual reality travel experience. And that brought up memories of having travelled to Africa previously that he'd never previously told the care staff. There were other examples like that. There was an example of a woman who used virtual reality to visit Venice, and that initiated a conversation about her honeymoon, which she had spent in Venice, which the care providers did not know about. And they said, okay, that information is immediately going on the care plan. So this idea of exploring other places as a way of getting to know the people was one of the really valuable things about virtual reality. And one of the reasons it works for that is because it is fully immersive. So you're right there, you're right under the sea, for example. So one of the experiences that can be used is an underwater exploration experience. And, you know, it really does give people the sense that they are leaving the physical world and entering the virtual world. But there's a flip side to that. And one of the problems with that is that because in order to be fully immersive, people have to wear the head-mounted display, which cuts off all vision of the physical environment. And this can bring a number of challenges. It can raise issues of safety, but it means that the person who is sitting with the person experiencing VR, so the facilitator sitting with the person experiencing VR, is not visible, and it's very difficult to facilitate the experience. One of the issues is it can create a disconnect. So if somebody is fully immersed in the virtual experience, but then someone in the physical world is talking to them, they might experience this sense of psychosis or that disconnect from the real world. So that was very challenging for the staff members we spoke to. And they did need to carefully facilitate the experience. So this was very much a one-on-one activity. So rather than the group programs where one staff member might be running the bingo game, this was very much a one-on-one activity. And there was a lot of care involved in making sure people felt comfortable. You know, the facilitator would sit with the resident and explain, I'm here, and make them feel comfortable. But then if they do that during the experience, it can be quite disconcerting because of that full immersion. The other challenge of being fully immersed in a virtual experience is that it can be frightening. So we had some examples that our interviewees shared of residents who had accidentally encountered things in the virtual environment that was quite frightening. And so one of the obvious ones would be finding yourself in a place where a fear of heights might be experienced. So one of the staff members talked about a resident who accidentally found themselves at the top of the Grand Canyon or somewhere high, and he was terrified. He had a panic attack, but he didn't share that experience with the staff member. He just said, I've had enough, and off he went to his room. And it wasn't until later that she realised that he had experienced that fright. And so another really important challenge that the staff talked about was the difficulty that they had monitoring people's experiences and understanding people's responses, because with the headset on, the face and eye contact is gone, and the facial expressions are not visible, and it becomes really, really challenging to know whether somebody is enjoying the experience or whether they're experiencing a fright, as for example this person was. And so the staff members we spoke to did talk about that kind of the work involved in making sure that the experiences that they chose, so they had a range of VR experiences that they could choose from when they were using this activity. And they had to make sure those experiences aligned with people's individual interests, aligned with people's individual needs, you know, making sure that they didn't cause a fright, as we just saw previously, but also some people may have had a preference for the more kind of adrenaline rushing experiences, whereas others might have needed, more of a calming experience. And this lifestyle coordinator really, I thought, summed it up really well in saying, how do we individualize it for the people that are in that experience? We have to be quite neutral as facilitators when engaging people in VR. We can't take them on our journey. We have to allow them to promote their journey to us. And that aligns very nicely with those comments from the interviewees in the previous study who were very careful in sort of in gathering people's stories and understanding people's needs before they introduced the technology. So in summing up, one of the lessons I've gained from this research is that caregivers are playing a really crucial role in introducing the technology, and they are designing technology-based enrichment experiences. So they may not be designing the technologies, but they are designing the experience. They're choosing from an array of different experiences that are available, and they're identifying needs, and they are creating those technology-based experiences in response to the needs. Sorry, I just realised that quote was not visible on the slide. So caregivers are designing technology-based enrichment experiences, and they're providing that personalised care and connection. So going back to that key message from those earlier interviews, it's not about the technology, it's about people. But the people includes the residents and the caregivers in the aged care homes. And caregivers are playing this really crucial role. But that brings me to my conclusion, which is not a conclusion, but a question, unfortunately. It's more a dilemma. How can we leverage new technologies to augment personalised caregiving if it requires more staff time to do it well? So this is a situation where the technology-based experiences are not introducing efficiency. They're not kind of alleviating a care burden, as we sometimes hear technology being talked of. They are working well because of the time and attention that the care providers are giving to choosing the appropriate experiences. And we know that this time and attention is something that's in short supply in aged care. So how can we make sure that these new technologies are implemented in a way that provides this personalised care and connection if it requires more staff time to do it well? And so that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Very happy to hear some questions.